back to week 8 and 9 of Can ChatGPT Teach Me Japanese? I hope everyone had a nice Christmas and a good start into the new year. I also apologize for this being later than planned, but I got sick around New Year's and needed a bit to fully recover. As this week's video covers 2 weeks worth of Japanese with a bit more grammar and vocabulary than normally, so let's get going. Before we start, like always, let me know that I'm neither teacher nor linguist, so all the conclusions and impressions are a result of my own personal experience and opinion. I do try my best to look up stuff when necessary, but I can't fully promise that everything is totally bias-free. First, ChatGPT finally introduced us to the first 10 numbers, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 2. About the numbers 4 and 7, they can also be called differently in Japanese, but I will elaborate on that later in the grammar section. The other vocabulary we had would be examples of the I and Na adjectives. For the I adjectives, we had oishii, tasty, takai, tall, expensive, yasui, cheap, ookii, big, and chisai, small. For the Na adjectives, we had kirei, clean, pretty, shizuka, quiet, benly, convenient, and igiyaka, lively. As you can see, while all the I adjectives end on an I and therefore are relatively easy to spot, the Na adjectives don't end on the hiragana na. The reason why they are called Na adjectives has to do with some grammatical rules, which I will elaborate later on too. Now, to start off the grammar section, let's elaborate on the number issue I mentioned at the start of the video. The Japanese numbers 4 and 7 can be pronounced as yon and nana and chi and chichi. Normally you use yon and nana, as shi and chichi are similar sounding to the Japanese word for that, shi. So using the letter casually is considered a bad omen or inviting bad luck. Shi and chichi are mainly used in senior Japanese and compound words. For example, the Japanese word for April, aka the 4th month, would be shigatsu. Another uses for shi and chichi would be in the traditional Japanese sports, like for example kendo. When counting out loud your swings during training, you use shi and chichi. This has two main reasons. One would be that these traditional sports have been around longer than the modern Japanese system, in one way or another, so they often use senior Japanese terms. The other is that it is more practical to count with shi and chichi while training, as they are shorter and harder syllables than yon and nana. As you need to maintain your breathing rhythm while training, it is preferable to use harder syllables as they make it easier to count. Like, you can try it for yourself. Just start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and then try the second option 1, 2, 3, 4. Especially, for example, while you're working out, like count your steps or whatever like exercise you're doing. Next rule would be also and to. Also to use the same hiragana, the hiragana is mo. When mo is used in a sentence, it substitutes wa. In the following, I will show you 3 different sentence structures where mo is used. Important to note is that also 2 sentences normally have a sentence that predates the mo sentence. I'm not showing the predating sentence in the following examples, as they aren't really relevant for explaining the different sentence structures. First example would be Tomodachi mo gakusei desu. Here we have the subject, Tomodachi, friend, followed by mo, also to, followed by a noun, gakusei, student, and ending with desu. This sentence structure is used when you want to express that someone identifies as the same thing as the subject or person in the previous sentence. The second example would be Tomodachi mo gakko ni imasu. Here you have the subject, Tomodachi, friend, followed by mo, also to, followed by place, gakko, school, plus ni, which I will elaborate on later in this video, plus imasu, to be. This sentence structure is used when you want to express that someone is at the same place as the subject or person in the previous sentence. Last example would be Tomodachi mo kohi o nomimasu. Here you have the subject, Tomodachi, friend, followed by mo, followed by an object, kohi, coffee, plus o, a particle that signifies which object is affected by a specific action or verb, plus the verb, nomimasu, to drink. This sentence structure is used when you want to express that someone is doing the same thing as the subject or person in the previous sentence. As you can see, even though all examples shown here are different in terms of sentence structure, mo is always in the second place in each sentence, so always directly after the subject in those cases. Important to note is that ChatGPT was a bit unclear with this specific lesson, as it only showed and elaborated on the first example, but didn't really mention the second or the third sentence structure, but used these latter sentence structures in following lessons, which was a bit confusing for me. I should also mention through all the necessary grammar lessons to understand the sentence were previously discussed, but until this point weren't really used outside their prospective lessons, so in other words, weren't really used in combination exercise. So I was a bit taken aback by the sudden change. So next would be the locative adverbs. The locative adverbs would be koko, meaning here, soko, meaning there, and asoko, meaning over there. Note that they sound really similar to the previous discussed demonstrative pronouns kore, sore, and are. This, that, and that over there. So keep this in mind when learning, as they are easy to mix up. As you can see in the example, koko wa kohi desu, the coffee is here, and those three adverbs are also in the same position in the sentence structure as the pronouns, which makes a potential mix-up even more likely. The general sentence structure goes adverb plus wa plus noun subject plus this. Next would be the grammatical rules necessary for using the E adjectives. Just as a quick reminder, adjectives are words that describe how an object and or subject present themselves or how they are perceived by others. All E adjectives, as the name indicate, end with an E in their basic form. Though also important to note is that not every adjective that ends with an E is automatically an E adjective. This will become clearer later on when we discuss the na adjectives. Now first the present tense. The words used for the examples are kohi, coffee, as subject, and takai, expensive, as the adjective. The positive sentence is pretty easy, as you just need to use the already familiar sentence structure with wa and desu without needing to adapt the words in any way, shape, or form. You can just take the basic form and put it in the needed position. Hence you get kohi wa takai desu. The coffee is expensive. For the negative sentence, you still have the same general structure, but you need to add a suffix to the adjective. The ending e is erased and substituted with the suffix kunai. So takai becomes takakunai. The full sentence would hence be kohi wa takakunai desu. The coffee is not expensive. The past tense follows the same structure as the negative present tense. The e is erased and in turn you add a necessary suffix. For the positive sentence, this would be kata, making it kohi wa takata desu. The coffee was expensive. For the negative sentence, the previous kunai turns into kunakata. So you erase the e for the kunai and also add kata. So the full sentence would be kohi wa takakunakata desu. The coffee wasn't expensive. Last but not least, the grammar section for the na adjectives. Like mentioned in the beginning of this video, unlike the e adjectives, the na adjectives can be identified through, for example, a common ending hiragana. Unfortunately, you have no choice but to just remember which are na adjectives and which aren't. Now first, about the present tense rules. For the positive sentence, you follow the familiar structure of noun, plus wa, plus adjective, plus des. Kohi wa benri desu. The coffee is convenient. For the negative sentence, you simply substitute the des for cha arimasen. Kohi wa benri cha arimasen. The coffee is not convenient. The past tense too follows the familiar sentence structure and you just need to adapt the respective suffix. For the positive sentence, you turn desu into deshita in order to signal past tense. Kohi wa benri deshita. The coffee was convenient. The negative sentence is even easier, as you only need to add deshita after the cha arimasen. So, kohi wa benri cha arimasen deshita. Coffee was not convenient. Something that is important to note here, and maybe a bit of a stumbling stone, is that the negative present tense does not have desu, or relevant conjugation of desu, included, while the past tense does. So, remember, present tense doesn't have a desu, past tense have the deshita. Now for why they are called na adjectives. Depending on how you formulate your sentence, you may need to add the hiragana na as a kind of connective verb between the adjective and the noun. Example 1 shows you the same example we had in the previous slides. As you can see, you can't find a na anywhere. But if you switch the position of the adjective and the noun in the sentence, as seen in example 2, you need to substitute a wa with a na, hence the name na adjective. The entire na adjective lessons was quite confusing to ChatGPT, as when they introduced them, the chat only introduced them by using sentences like you can see in example 1, but also didn't elaborate at all on the na. Even after asking for elaboration, it still was unclear, as it tried to explain it, but didn't really use any examples. So I actually needed to look this up separately in different literature, which was a bit more time consuming. Now to end everything with something positive, we did have more crossover exercises which also combined various grammatical rules into one. I may have complained about them a bit previously as they came out of left field essentially, but they are needed in order to become more fluent, so they are ultimately something positive. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.